General Hospital will reveal that Brooklyn and Chase have spent happy days together in their marriage, but the dream of a complete family remains distant. As each month passes, Brooklyn's hope slowly fades, replaced by anxiety and insecurity. She tries to hide her fears, but she cannot stop the long, restless nights, blaming herself for not being able to bring the great joy her beloved husband deserves. She begins to feel inadequate, the invisible pressures from the scrutinizing eyes of those around her suffocating her. Chase, though always trying to stay optimistic and comfort his wife, cannot hide the turmoil in his heart. He too longs to become a father, to see his and Brooklyn's first child. But every time he sees Brooklyn quietly wiping away the hidden tears, he can only hold her, helpless before the reality. Their plans to expand their family, once a source of inspiration for both, have now become a tense and painful battle. Lois, upon hearing this news, immediately falls into a state of panic. A storm begins to stir in her mind, bringing up the buried memories of the past. Many years ago, Brooklyn had become pregnant after an emotionally charged summer with Dante. When Lois discovered her daughter was pregnant at such a young age, she was overwhelmed with fear and the obsession over the family's honor. In a moment of confusion, she made a decision that she would later never forgive herself for, lying to Brooklyn, telling her the baby had died after birth, and secretly arranging for the child to be adopted. Lois did not expect that the consequences of that childbirth would not only cause emotional pain but would also leave serious repercussions for Brooklyn's body. The complications harmed her ability to conceive, a truth that Brooklyn herself had not fully realized. Lois, thinking the secret would forever be buried, had lived in false reassurance for many years. But everything began to change when a young man named Gio appeared in Port Charles. Gio had the look of a stranger, but to Lois, every feature on his face evoked memories of Dante and Brooklyn. Every time she saw Gio, she felt the fear gnawing at her heart. The similarities between him and Dante were constant reminders that the brutal truth she had tried to forget was now becoming a reality. Lois felt cornered, the ghost of the past suddenly revived, threatening to sweep away everything she had tried to protect for years. She knew she could no longer run away, and the true nightmare was just beginning. One rainy night, Lois entered the church with a heavy heart and a look of confusion. The quiet atmosphere there made her feel the weight of her long-held guilt even more intensely. The sound of footsteps echoed on the cold stone floor, a constant reminder of the betrayal she had committed against her own daughter. In an uncontrollable moment, Lois knelt before the statue of Christ, her hands trembling, tears falling down her cheeks. Her voice echoed weakly but full of emotion, each word cutting into her own heart. She confessed everything that had happened, from the fear when she found out Brooklyn was pregnant at such a young age to the harsh decision forcing her daughter to give up the child right after birth. She spoke of how she arranged for the baby to be adopted, of the cruel lie that the baby had died, and the haunting guilt that had plagued her for years. Lois believed she had done it to protect Brooklyn from public judgment, from the condemning eyes of others. But now, as everything began to resurface, she realized that she had caused an irreparable tragedy. Lois' confession filled the silent space of the church, but she did not realize she was not alone. In a dark corner, Dante quietly lit candles, praying for his deceased lover, Sam. At first, he only heard a few scattered words, but the more he listened, the more shocked he became. His heart tightened as the pieces of the past slowly came together. Gio was not just a stranger. He was his and Brooklyn's son. Anger erupted inside Dante like a storm. He stepped out of the shadows, his cold, sharp gaze startling Lois. "Why?" His voice was deep and stern, filled with fury. "Why did you do this to Brooklyn? Why did you take my son?" Dante's questions were like daggers, piercing Lois's fear, leaving her with no way to escape. Lois, cornered, could only lower her head, tears streaming down her face. She admitted everything, recounting the full truth with a choked voice. Each word she spoke was a shock to Dante. He stood frozen, his fists clenched as he realized that Gio was his biological son, a child he had never known. The emotions within him were a whirlwind, pain, anger, and an unspeakable regret. Those moments stretched on in heavy silence. Lois knelt, her shoulders shaking, begging Dante for forgiveness. But he could not respond immediately. The storm inside him was still raging, and he knew that what he had just heard would change not only his life but Brooke Lynn and Joe's lives forever. How would he face this secret, and how could the pieces of truth not destroy the lives of everyone he loved? In the silence of the church, that question hung in the air like a warning bell for the coming storm. Lois knelt, begging Dante to keep the secret. She feared that if the truth came out, it would ruin Brooke Lynn and Chase, and force Gio to confront the painful reality of his origins. But Dante was not so quick to forgive. He was torn between the truth and family loyalty. He knew that Brooke Lynn and Chase deserved to know the truth, but he also understood that revealing it would shatter their lives. Meanwhile, Brooke Lynn, unaware of the confrontation between her mother and Dante, was increasingly feeling the pressure. Small clues about her first pregnancy were slowly turning into an obsession, especially when she encountered Gio at an event at Rice Plaza. The strange sense of familiarity she felt could not be explained, but she quickly pushed it aside, not wanting to face the painful memories. Dante left the church, his mind in turmoil. He couldn't decide whether to reveal the truth or let it remain buried as Lois wanted. A storm was brewing within him, not only from Lois' confessions but also because of his responsibility to Gio, the child he had never known existed. Events were silently building up, and when this secret was exposed, it would shake Port Charles, with consequences that could not be foreseen. Lois knelt in the stillness of the church, her shoulders trembling under the weight of guilt and fear. She bowed her head, her hands tightly gripping her fingers as if trying to find some support in her despair. Every thought in her head was clear, the images of Brooke Lynn, Chase, and especially Gio. Lois could not imagine the harm this truth would cause once exposed, the damage that could never be repaired. Brooke Lynn's life would be turned upside down, the small family she had worked so hard to build would collapse. And Gio, the grandson she thought would never return, would have to face the painful truth about his origins. Lois felt the breath of Dante standing not far from her. His presence was like an invisible weight, pushing her into a corner. She didn't need to look up to feel the anger in his gaze, as if trying to break through the weak walls she had built. Lois knew there was no way to escape, no excuse that could hide the truth anymore. She tried to cling to a shred of hope, a bit of forgiveness, but deep down, she knew that Dante had made his decision. Dante stood there, silent like a statue. In his mind, the confessions he had just heard were still echoing, each detail like a sharp knife cutting into his heart. He could not shake the image of Gio, the son he never knew existed, nor could he imagine what Brooke Lynn had gone through when she believed the baby had died. This truth weighed heavily on him, a burden he could not discard. He knew he could not keep this secret forever, but he also realized that revealing it would change the lives of many people completely. Meanwhile, Brooke Lynn was still trying to cope with the pressure she could not explain. She sensed something was wrong, a secret floating in the air, but she couldn't grasp it. Recently, she had often seen Lois with strange expressions, sometimes tense, sometimes immersed in fear. The vague images of her first pregnancy, the strange feelings when seeing Gio, everything was becoming a chaotic emotional mess, but Brooke Lynn did not dare to dig deeper. She feared that if she did, she would uncover something too painful to accept. Dante walked out of the church, his footsteps echoing in the quiet night, blending with the distant sounds of the city sinking into sleep. He didn't know how he would face Brooke Lynn and Chase. He didn't know how to explain to Gio that he was not just an ordinary young man but a part of him and Brooke Lynn. Everything seemed to be heading toward an inevitable breaking point. Dante felt that when this secret was revealed, it would not only shake his life but all of Port Charles. But could he keep it inside without letting it consume his soul? He couldn't be sure. In the pressure-filled silence of the night, the storm was raging within him, and he knew that the coming days would change everything forever.